Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Geographic Society of Chicago's August Travelogue. I'm Nicolette from the GSC office, and I'll be moderating today. Just a reminder, if you have any questions for Kari, please put those in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to get to them, time permitting, at the end of the presentation. If this is your first time attending a GSC event, welcome, and thanks for tuning in. The Geographic Society of Chicago has educated the public about geography and its important uses since 1898. Through services such as our geospatial technology programs, we offer unique educational experiences that harness the power of maps and the integrative tools of GIS to solve environmental and community issues. Today's travelogue presenter is Kari Ann Buckvold. Kari, thank you so much for being here with us today and presenting on the Apostle Islands.
All right. Thank you so much, Nicolette. And I do have to say, my name is actually pronounced Kari, rhymes with safari.
Sorry about that.
It totally happens. It's kind of an unusual name here, but if you were in Norway, you'd know about 6 of us.
I do apologize, Kari.
No problem. Thank you. Excellent. Well, those of you that are regular viewers of Geographic Society of Chicago webinars might be used to exotic locations like scuba diving in the Philippines or visiting Indonesia. But today, I'm going to talk about a place you can actually visit within a day's drive and go on an adventure. Now, I'm going to share what I did in 2019 and paddling the Apostle Islands. As Nicolette mentioned, my name is Kari, and I am actually a GIS professional with Jacobs Engineering, so you might see a few maps along the way here. All right, so let's begin. Oops. Oh. I want to talk a little bit about where the Apostle Islands are. So it is on the tippy-tip northern part of Wisconsin, right on Lake Superior. And I'll just talk a little bit about Lake Superior. It's the largest of the 5 Great Lakes of North America. It's the largest freshwater lake by surface area, and it's the 3rd largest freshwater lake by volume. The Apostle Islands were named in the early 18th century by Jesuits, who have a tendency to name beautiful things after religious figures. There's actually way more than 12, and there's 21 currently, 22 or 21, depending on how they count them. They actually knew there were more than 12 when they decided to go with the name of the apostles. The name just kind of stuck. The max length of Lake Superior is 350 miles, and the max width is 160 miles. It goes as deep as 1,300 feet, and it has 2,900 cubic miles of water. The shore length is 1,729, plus about 1,000 for the islands, the apostles, and the others. Oops. Oh, you know what? Yes, I can see my slides are not advancing. There we go. All right, let's move on to the next page where I am showing the tourist map of the Apostle Islands. So you can see on the left here, I have just a little inset map. So you can you can kind of scale your way in. But once you get in there, you can see those islands are just scattered about and really close together. So this is the journey that we did. We took 3 days to paddle 25 miles. And let me tell you, I don't even walk that in 3 days. So I was a little concerned. But one little thing I want to say is each star is a mile that we paddled. And you can see that there is different colors for each day that we paddled. So we started mostly on the shore for our first day, which was good. We wanted to get used to paddling in a big lake. I went with a group called Lost Creek Adventures that are based in Bayfield, and let me tell you, they were wonderful. We had two guides, Gage and Kieran, who one of them, Kieran, was a native and local and had been on the water all her life. And even though she seemed kind of young, she kept us all in line. So the first thing we had to do as landlubbers is throw all our gear down and see if we have the right equipment. So we went around to see what was necessary and what wasn't. So I was told that my big wool sweater was not important, though later I wish I had brought some extra layers. So now I know, bring a small down jacket or things for keeping warm. I happen to have my own dry sacks, but they supplied them, which are like that item in the, oops, let me go back. So here, this orange bag is a dry sack. So it's made out of thick rubber and you put all your things in there. And I learned a little tip. If you use your foot to push down the items in the dry sack, and then when you're rolling it up, you use your knee to push out the extra air, you'll make it a little compact. Now you want to put everything in a dry sack because there is a possibility of capsizing. And if you capsize, everything is wet and there isn't a dryer out there to dry your stuff off. I brought a luxury item, which was my drawing things. I have a little sketchbook along with some pens and some watercolors. And I'll show you some of those later in this presentation. My stuff looks kind of small if you see everything that's circled in yellow, but we have to carry some communal items like tents, stoves, as well as coolers of food. There were about 10 of us on this trip. Once we do the equipment throwdown, it's time to load up the boats. And here's what our boats look like. So you have me back here. Oh, goodness gracious. So you have me right here. My gear was in here. My friend Jennifer was sitting up at the front and her gear was in the front compartment. The middle section was reserved for our communal items. And then we all had wetsuits underneath our clothes, as well as a spray skirt. And that includes there was a strap here called the oh crap strap. That is, let me back up. When you sit in your kayak, especially on an open lake, you want a spray skirt. So there are some suspenders with the spray skirt and it kind of looks like a rubber tutu. And once you sit in your kayak, you put the spray skirt all around this lip so that it makes a watertight seal. But if you can imagine, if you were to capsize, you don't want to stay stuck there. So there's a strap you pull in case of emergency, and that will just rip the skirt right off so that you can get out really quickly. I also had my trusty GPS watch so that I could create some maps later that you're seeing now. So here was our first day. We started out in Bayfield and then went along the shore of the Bayfield Peninsula, which was kind of good. Like I said, being out in open water was kind of a concern for me. But we saw some really cool things when we were first starting out, and that was two shipwrecks, the Fedora and the Ottawa. So the Fedora was the first shipwreck that we came across. And I remember our guides telling us when we first started off that we were going to see them. And I thought, how are we going to see shipwrecks if they're underwater? And when we got close to this area, I remember we were paddling around and not seeing anything because our guides couldn't remember exactly where it was. But once we went over it, it was magnificent. You can see this is a Google Earth image of the ship, and the red track is my GPS watch tracks. So even though this particular boat is 10 feet underwater, it feels like it's right at the surface. In fact, I remember pulling my legs up because I thought it was going to scrape the bottom of my boat. And you can see one pass wasn't enough for me. I had to go all the way boat astern to see the whole thing. And honestly, I would have gone over it several more times if I wanted to share the experience with my other travelers. So this shipwreck is the Fedora. It was built in 1889 and it sank in 1901 in 10 feet of water. There were no lives lost. What had happened was it had caught fire from a kerosene lamp in the engine room. Captain Frank Fink beached the vessel toward the mainland so that the 17-man crew could escape and jump to shore. But it caused damage to a nearby lumber yard, which I understand burned for about 2 or 3 days afterwards. But it is really remarkable. You can even see from this aerial photograph, this shipwreck is 100 years old. One of the things that I found while I was researching for this presentation is I wanted to know more about this ship. And it turns out there is a whole website dedicated to Wisconsin shipwrecks, and it will tell you everything you want to know about it. It will give you a gallery of photos. So some of these kind of it looks like the picture that you saw. But if you click on one of these pictures, it will have a pop-up and give you more information about it. Additionally, it gives you the numbers and the details, the service history, a map, and then it also gives information about dive logistics if you're a scuba diver and you want to go take a closer look at it. The second shipwreck that we saw was the Ottawa. And this one was built in 1881, but it sank in 1909 in 12 feet of water. It was a tugboat and it did rescue and salvage jobs, but it caught fire and the crew escaped to the nearby Hoyt boat, which it had just rescued. So the rescuer became the rescued. So this one was remarkable because it is right at shore, but it's still sticking out of water. And again, that wood and the metal is about 100 years old and it's still pretty well preserved. So this is what it looks like. This is what my tracks look like going over it. So you can see there's a lot of it sticking out of water and there's a lot underwater. And this is the page on the Wisconsin shipwrecks dedicated to the Ottawa. You could see it was kind of a majestic ship. So we spent the first night at Rock Island. So there are all our boats. There were about, like I said, there were about 10 of us all together. And it was really cool because we would spend the time at the beach and these sailboats would pull in and drop anchor for the night. And that's how they spent their evening. I will say that I wish I could say that we camped on the beach, but it was not allowed. And rangers actually came by at night and kicked people off and sent them back into the campground. So this was my pre-dinner sketching. We had a dinner of foil wrapped whitefish and potatoes. And I was very interested in watching our guides cook and make food because I want to learn how to do that myself. And they had some really good ideas. And as someone who doesn't really love fish, this actually turned out really delicious. It might be the big slab of butter that they put in the foil pouch with the whitefish. You can see this is a little sketch that I created right before dinner, and I didn't color this one in because it was time to eat. They had also packed a cast iron skillet and made some brownies, but we didn't eat them until the next morning because they were done a little late and the crust was very well done, but the inside was a little soft. I'm an outside crusty person. The next morning, I took advantage of the fact that I can't sleep very well by going down to the beach at about 4:30 or 5. And right at dawn, the sky was just beautiful. So I took advantage of making a sketch of that scene. So it was like a campfire and a piece of driftwood. And I took some artistic liberties and added one of our boats for good measure. I always let the guides know that the night before that will probably likely go down to the beach before everyone wakes. To me, it's very important to let people know where I am in case something happens. But at 7 o'clock in the morning, our guide would wake everyone up by gathering those people that were already awake and sing them a song to the tune of Take Me Out to the Ball Game using kayaking in Apostle Islands. It was very comical to see people who aren't morning people like me roll out of their tents with a smile on their face, even though they'd probably rather sleep in. So that brings us to our second day, which was a really long day. It was about 12 miles of paddling. So we started on Oak Island, and our guide actually thought to tell us after we loaded up for the day that Oak Island has the greatest density of black bears in the lower 48 states per square mile. And I looked this up, and it's an interesting sort of life cycle. Bears will mate and have babies, and then they reach critical mass, and then their populations go down. But the thing is, on an island like this, they don't get as big as bears you might have seen in pictures from Alaska. They're actually more like big husky dogs. And in fact, one of our campers, our guides did warn us that there were bears, and just to be aware of, but not how many. But one of our campers who was sleeping in the hammock said that he peered out in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, and there was a bear looking right at him, but it was very small. So we learned that afterwards, and that's Oak Island. As we made our way to Raspberry Island, which is here, we encountered some rough water. You can see it's not a straight line as you would want to, like you would want to do in paddling. You want the shortest distance, right? That is because the waves were coming in really rough at that area. And so our guide had us, how do you say, paddle 45 degrees towards this buoy. And then once we reached that buoy, we turned around and did 45 angles against the waves back to the Raspberry Island. And to me, it looked like we were doing a straight line 45 degrees, but you can see here, the lake had other ideas for us. At Raspberry Island, there was a lighthouse that we got to tour. And then on York Island, we just made a short pit stop for a rest because it's a long ways of paddling. You can see it's 2.5 miles. And then finally, we made our way to Sand Island for the evening. So I want you to think about something here. We had run across someone in a sailboat who had just come from the opposite direction, and he told us that the waters were really rough. And in fact, the Coast Guard had to go in and save a couple kayakers. So we have an element of danger that we have to think about. Also, we're exhausted mentally and physically. We're not used to this. And I want you to think about if you were to see this site on the left, it looks like a bunch of floating crosses. And we're on a bunch of islands called the Apostles. I have to say, I thought this was a sign of the rapture or maybe my impending doom, but I have learned that this is actually a phenomenon called a superior image. And that happens when, when, as you know, hot air normally rises, but if there's cold air underneath it, it will bend the light in a different direction. So things will look like they're floating, which is what we have here. So if you can see this schematic, this would be our trees over here, but they look like they were here. And the phenomenon might make the items look like they're above the horizon. It might also look like they're inverted, which it looks like both are happening here, which is why it looked like a bunch of crucifixes floating there. So as we near the edge of Rock Island, that first island that we were on, and we turned to go rest on a beach, the waves just knocked us off our boats. And in fact, remember the oh crap strap? I sure did, because I had to use it because we totally got capsized. And a bunch of us were just kind of cold and, cranky, but our guides were really good about keeping us entertained. I'm telling you, it was like we were children. So on the right here, we were participating in a game where we have to hold our paddles, but then she gives directions like Twister, and grab the paddle to your left, grab the paddle to your right, grab the person across, and whoever dropped their paddle was out. So it was a matter of the last one standing. So it's a nice little diversion to forget that you're really damp and you just got capsized and you have to go across open water in it. But it was worth it because we arrived at Raspberry Island where there was a lighthouse. It was built in 1862. It was placed in service the following year in 1863. It was enlarged or added on to in 1906. And then it was automated in 1947. And the light was moved outside the building in 1957. It also happens that you can actually volunteer to be a lighthouse keeper and stay there for a couple weeks and give tours to people like us that passed by. So let me tell you, when I retire, yes, please. The idea of this particular lighthouse, it employed a Fresnel lens. And unlike lighthouses before that just build a fire and use mirrors, it used a bunch of prisms on the light covering, as you can see in the upper left here. It also had the benefit of being, you just had to use one oil lantern to illuminate the sky for this. And so this is the fellow, our guide, telling us how it works. And you can see that's in the lower left here. This is where they would put the lens, and then this is where they would put the oil lantern. I didn't think to take a lot of pictures inside. It was a little hard to do, but the craftsmanship inside the lighthouse was really beautiful. A lot of beautiful molding around the windows and doors. And I will tell you, one of the quizzes you have to think about is the guide asks you, what do you think is the oldest item in the lighthouse? Because a lot of it is reproductions, but just something to think about if you happen to go there. After we had a lunch of salmon on the picnic benches at Raspberry Island, which, by the way, there are quite a bit of raspberry bushes there. When we were walking up the shore, we saw a bunch. But after we left Raspberry Island, we went and just stopped on York Island. And there wasn't anything on York Island. It was just like an empty park, if that makes sense. So it was kind of trippy to run across these rock and driftwood sculptures that someone had left. And we're not sure what it said. It looks like the something something family sculpture. So we thought this was an interesting little treasure that someone left for us. After that, we made camp at Sand Island, where we had stir fry for dinner. Like they really knew how to do camp cooking and, you know, beyond the normal hot dogs and hamburgers. So that sets us up, and we did the whole gathering around the campfire for stories and exchanging life ideas and stuff. Just very nice. So that brings us to day 3. I saw another optical illusion. There, we saw what we came to see, which were the sea cave. That was the feature attraction. The following morning, again, I'm an early riser, so I went down to the docks and made a sketch of the shoreline. And you can see there's a whole bunch of different trees, and my camera, my iPhone 7 at the time, didn't take the best pictures, but you can see that there was a bunch of red rocks, like the sandstone shore, along with some really tall trees. But there's nothing like the Northwood trees. And because I can take artistic liberties, I can remove that snow fencing at the end of the pier. But also at this time, I have to tell you about this experience that I had. It is dawn, so it's about a half hour before the sunrise. And my phone doesn't do this justice. But imagine standing at the edge of this pier with your toes at the end of the dock, and you have this blue color, and it's the same below and above. And if you scan 180 degrees, it's just this surrounded by blue that just seems to go on forever. It was like floating in space. It is like nothing I've ever experienced before. And so that's one of the benefits of waking up early, is you get to experience things like this. And I was all by myself to experience this. So it was kind of special. And just to show, this is just a few minutes later after the sun rises. And you can see the sun is already warming up the water and making it ripple and giving the clouds pink and yellow hues and just giving it that dimension that we're used to. So I'm going to show you the next few slides of our visit to the sea cave. I'm going to read off some of the characteristics of it. So centuries of wave action, freezing and thawing, have sculpted the shorelines throughout the Apostle Islands National Landscape over 1 billion years ago. At that time, rivers carried sandy sediment from the hills, what is now southern Minnesota, to a basin where the Apostle Islands are now found. These rivers, known as braided streams, carried sediment that slowly filled the basin, forming a sand flat. That area was covered with many shallow ponds, some only a few inches deep, connected by shallow channels. And before I move on, you can see some of our fellow campers are exploring some of the caves. And what just remarked me about this whole landscape is look at those really tall trees and really thick trees. Those would be remarkable on their own, but they are standing at the edge of those little sandstone cliffs, or big sandstone cliffs. Sand deposits in this environment were thinly bedded, fine-grained, and extensively ripple-marked. These deposits eventually became sandstone known as the Devil Islands Formation, named for the locality where it was first identified and described by geologists. So you can actually paddle within these sea caves. And our guides knew which ones to go in and which ones you could go through and come out another way versus ones that wouldn't allow us to go through. So that was kind of important to know because you could get stuck or you just go in and have to back paddle. But it was just kind of remarkable. Where wave action erodes and undercuts the base of a cliff, a feature known as the re-entrant develops. Sea caves are produced when a number of re-entrants join behind the face of a cliff, leaving behind supported pillars and arches. So, and these sea caves and cliffs just go on for miles. It's really pretty. It does happen, though. I didn't see any of them in particular. I don't know why I asked, but I did. And it happens that sometimes these cliffs shear off and block sea caves. In fact, that's what this is right here. There was a peninsula like this, and it sheared off right into here. So, I don't know if people get stuck on there or if there's a warning sign that it's about to collapse and people don't go in there, but it does happen. They develop most easily where the sand layers comprising a rock formation are very thin. The thinly bedded and easily eroded sandstones of the Devil Islands Formation are the source of the Apostle Islands National Lakeshore spectacular array of sea caves. And this is a view from when we are coming out of one of the sea caves that we went in. Again, some of them go in and come out another side, and then some just are kind of just carved out as a cave. But this was really, really neat to see. I mean, so many beautiful colors. And I wish that I had taken a picture of it, but I had created some sketches of our adventures and put it on the envelopes of our guides to give them as a tip. And it was inspired by some of these pictures that I did. So after this, we did the quick 3 or 4 mile paddle back to the shore where we loaded the boats back onto the trailer to take them back to the center. And we went home. But I have to tell you, this adventure never really left me. And a few weeks later, I was inspired to create this map in my journal. And I want to explain a little bit of what I did. It's multimedia. So the water is actually water soluble ink. And I used a brush and water to make the texture of water. So you can see it's thin in some places and thicker in others to give the illusion of depth like you would see on a map. I also used a felt tip pen to do the outlines and lettering. And then I also used colored pencils to create the islands and the picture insets. And I just want to highlight some of the things. So food is very important to me. So Friday, we just had some sandwiches. And for dinner, we had that whitefish and potatoes and foil. The next day we had pancakes, but they were like, instead of like flat pancakes, they were little like ball pancakes. And as well as that brownie that I mentioned. For lunch, we had smoked salmon. And then For dinner, we had the stir fry. And then Sunday, we had scrambled eggs and vegetables, like what they used in the stir fry pan. And you have the pictures with the fedora shipwreck. That one really made an impression on me. Next, we have the Raspberry Island Lighthouse, along with the prism lamp that they used. And of course, I had to create a series of pictures for the caves of Sand Island, because like I said, that was the star of this whole trip. Then I just made a little picture of the rock art that we saw, as well as the optical illusions that I saw, remembering the floating crosses as we left Oak Island, and then the floating islands on Sand Island. I also made a note of the different mileages that we did, as well as some of the little smaller segments where between the time that we stopped. I also made a picture of the boat that we used, which was a Seaward tandem kayak, and it was nice and yellow. It was a really pretty one. And I know I'm done a bit early, but that is my presentation, and I would love to hear if you have any questions.
Looks like we do have some questions. Let's see here. Yes, we have a few. While we give some folks the opportunity to add in some more, I'm just going to touch briefly on some announcements. And of course, thank Kari so much for this amazing presentation. Super fabulous. While we wait, I am going to pull up some presentation, some event promotions that we have going on. Oop, yep, more questions are coming in. Looks great. I'm just going to share my screen here. All right. So we did have some donators for today's travelogue. Fantastic. If you have not donated and want to, please go ahead and scan this QR code. It will take you to our website to complete that donation. Thank you again to all of the folks who help keep these events free. This is the last chance to sign up for our Greek Islands travelogue and dinner. It's a week from today, Tuesday, August 27th at 7 p.m. in Greek Islands in Lombard. Feel free to scan this QR code, or you can visit our website to register. We have just a couple of seats left. You don't want to miss it. It's going to be a great presentation by Jean Flynn. The next travelogue is going to be Tuesday, September 17th. This will be on Cuba, presented by none other than great GSC board member, Derek Barthel. The next Geo Trivia Night is on the books. It will be Monday, September 16th at 7 p.m. at Patty Mac's. This will be in the same Irving Park neighborhood. This is also on our website, or feel free to scan the QR code for more information. Finally, we have our Biodiversity Festival on September 21st. We are again frequenting Big Marsh State Park. We're going to have up to 14 different scientists and scientist organizations coming out and doing activities with us, and also presenting during the nature walks. If you're interested, please feel free to scan here, or you can also visit us on our website. All right, we got some questions.
So I think I see now that I'm not sharing, I can see them. So I will go in the order that they were asked.
Great.
And the first one is, are there any formal boat tours through the Apostles as well as those for the less active? Also, are the Apostles a national seashore? And yes, I can't believe I skipped over my notes where I actually talked about the Apostles were admitted as or designated a national seashore by Richard Nixon in 1970. I actually had a little spiel about that, but I forgot it. And I have to believe there are other formal boat tours of the Apostles for those that aren't as active. I'm still at an age where I can still do that. And before I get too old to do it, I chose to do it that way. But yeah, I'm sure if you look, there are other tours. The next question is, who were the tour guides and how long was the trip and how many days? Our tour guides were Kieran and Gage. And again, that was 5 years ago. I don't know if they're still there, but both of them were outstanding. And this is through an organization called Lost Creek Adventures. And I don't know if I have the ability to write in the chat. I will drop in the link to their website. Again, they were wonderful. And in fact, one of their sort of claims was that they actually had permits to camp, do tours where they camped on the island. They said there were other groups that offered tours of the Apostle Islands via kayaking, but the camping had to be done on the mainland. So they would camp on the mainland and then paddle out to the boats to explore for the day, but then come back at night. So it's one of the reasons why my friend wanted to go with this particular company, is that they had the ability to camp on the islands. The trip was the distance in miles, I'm looking at my map here, was over 26 miles and it was over 3 days. Hopefully that answers it. The next question is, how strenuous was the paddling and was I sore? So great question. Another story I wanted to tell was that I had done a number of river kayaking trips and I knew this wasn't the same thing because you put a boat in a river, the current's doing all the work. This with a lake, you might be paddling against the waves. So it's a different. And paddling, I want to say, I don't remember it being strenuous because for 26 miles, it's almost like a marathon, not a sprint. So fortunately, our guides were really good about showing us how to paddle. So a lot of us have a tendency to paddle like this at, small screen, but they said, pretend there's a beach ball between you and you have to paddle around the beach ball. So it made for a more efficient paddle and strokes. And so it was surprisingly that quick little lesson really saved us a lot of energy. It was a little misleading because our guides would paddle like this, but that's only because if they paddled like the beach ball, they would have left us in the wake. So was I sore? I don't remember being like pulled muscle sore. I mean, I definitely was exhausted, but a good exhausted. I would definitely do it again. Uh, and for someone who hadn't like worked out or prepared for it, 3 days was just enough. If I was to do a longer tour of all the rest of the islands, I would need to train for it. The next question is, it's just a compliment. Lovely presentation and appreciated all the personal touches. Love your artwork. Thank you. The next question, did I practice kayaking or am I a regular kayaker? It's funny you should ask that. Back then, as I mentioned, I had done a number of river kayaking trips with some friends, here in Chicago on the Des Plaines River or the Chicago River, but not in open water. I have since moved to the Rogers Park neighborhood and have the ability to have a boat here. And I am on the open water a lot more often and I love it. So I'm trying to be a more regular paddler. And the final question is Lost Creek Adventures. And yeah, let me see if I can't get you guys a link for that. And that is the last question.
Great. Thank you all so much for coming here today, and a special thanks to Kari for an amazing presentation on the Apostle Islands. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and we will see you on the next one.